when they arrested him, they put him in solitary confinement for, I would say, at least 10 years, if not more. And when he was released from prison, from solitary. And he came across the border. He was really... I was there when he came across the border. And we also had a nun who was a sister, so it was a doctor, and another Maryknoll priest. We had a car, and he came across, just walked by himself across. And we did the paperwork. We had to kind of get him into Hong Kong and take him through the regular exit, got in the car. So we went to the Maryknoll Hospital, and he stayed there for a few days and kind of got checked out and began to gain some weight. And in the next 20 years, he lived in Hong Kong.
On September 7th, 1918, the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers sent 4 missioners to China, including Maryknoll co-founder Father Thomas Price, Father James E. Walsh, Father Francis X. Ford, and Father Bernard Meyer. This year, as we celebrate 100 years of mission sending on September 7th, we had the privilege of sitting down with Father John Cioppa, an 86-year-old Maryknoll missioner who knew one of the original 4 Maryknoll missioners to China, Bishop James E. Walsh. In fact, Father John was there in 1970 when Bishop James was released from a Shanghai prison after spending 12 years of his 20-year sentence primarily in solitary confinement. After the communist takeover of China in 1949, Bishop Walsh was arrested on charges that he had spied for the Vatican and the United States in 1958. It is believed that he was the last of 7,000 foreign Roman Catholic and Protestant missionaries to have been expelled from China. Most of Father John's missionary career was spent in Hong Kong, a former British colony, and in 1978 he was the first Maryknoll priest to be able to re-enter China since the communist takeover. Join us as we learn more about Father John's adventures in Hong Kong and China in this episode of Among the People.
Father John, good to see you and have you here with us. And we are fellow upstaters.
That's right.
And where were you from? I keep on associating you with Schenectady.
No. Latham.
It's Latham. My bad, right, as we say. And where exactly were you born?
In Green Island, New York, which is really a little island where the Hudson meets the Mohawk. 2,000 people.
I always considered the Mohawk holy water because, as you know from Orisville Shrine, the body of Isaac Jones was thrown into the Mohawk River, and it was never recovered.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, and then it flows from there through Amsterdam, New York, and I said, well, we've been consecrated with holy water here. So there have been quite a few Maryknollers from that Mohawk Valley.
That's right.
How did you get from Green Island to Maryknoll?
Well, it's a long story.
You were born in the bed because you wanted to be near your mother. Yes, I know that part.
Not sure. No, I'm coming from a Catholic family, an Italian background. And I don't ever remember when we were not Catholic, just the other way around. And my mother and father were just simple people, both workers. My father worked for the Delaware and Hudson Railroad up there. They built the railroad from New York to Montreal. And my mother worked as a seamstress. And it was during the war, and they did a lot of sewing of uniforms for the guys in service. That was kind of the time when she really worked her long hours and everything. And that's in the mid-40s, the 40s, yeah. And I went to school in Catholic school. Primary school was non-Catholic. It was a government school. Then in Form 1 to the 8th grade, 9th grade to 12th grade, I was at LaSalle Institute in Troy, New York, which is a Christian Brothers school, Catholic school in Troy.
LaSalle University.
Yeah,
in Philly.
Yeah. And while I was at LaSalle, in those Catholic schools, periodically they have a religious come in and talk to you about, who they are and where they're coming from, what they do. And it's kind of a promotion, too, for their own congregation, which is true, is what happened. And I had not heard very much about Maryknoll, and I remember the name. But one day a priest came from the Maryknoll Fathers, and he spoke to us in school. And that was my first really introduction to Maryknoll as such. And I always, from the time I was a kid, growing up, I always had the idea of probably the interest in becoming a priest. So that was always there. And when I heard that, I caught my eye or my ear or whatever, and I decided that, well, maybe I should give that a try. I had really never met a Maryknoll priest. In fact, the first Maryknoll priest I met was when I walked in the door at Maryknoll. All the processing and everything was done by mail. I never saw a Maryknoll priest. That's unusual. Usually they do visiting and stuff like that, but they went by mail and phone calls and stuff like that.
For the younger listeners in our audience, mail is the thing that existed before texting and before Instagram. And you actually wrote it or typed. Did you type it or write it? Yes. A typewriter. That's another thing, but that's for another podcast. So, now what did your parents think when you told them you wanted to be a priest and be a Maryknoller?
Mm-hmm. For the longest time, I didn't tell them because I didn't want them to treat me any differently than they did the other kids, or I didn't want the other kids to know either. That I was interested in becoming a priest. I'd be talking, joking. Finishing high school, and I had applied for Maryknoll. I was accepted, and for the next 10 years, I was in the Maryknoll formation process. I started by the Latin that I had in high school was not adequate, so I went down for 1 year of Latin down to Lakewood, New Jersey, and I spent 2 years there studying Latin and also first 2 years of college in Maryknoll. At that time, it was called Maryknoll Junior College, and then the second 2 years was at Glen Ellen, Illinois. Maryknoll had opened its own college formation program there on Glen Ellen, which is about maybe 10 or 15 miles west of Chicago. Mm-hmm. I spent the next 2 years there, and then there was 1 year they called novitiate, and I went to, I was in Bedford, Massachusetts, and then went down, come back, and next 4 more years here at the main building. And that then began my missionary career overseas. I was ordained in June of 1959, and in July, I boarded a ship in San Francisco and started a 30-day journey.
Mother of God, 30 days on a ship.
On a ship.
And it wasn't a cruise ship either.
No, it was a freighter. In fact, there was no passengers except this other guy, another priest, and they put us into the quarters, the staff quarters.
Crew, yeah.
They were double-decker. Fortunately, it was a room with just one double-decker. So he and I were there, but it wasn't a common bathroom outside, for 30 days crossing the Pacific. I never knew there was so much water in this world.
And where were you headed?
Heading to Hong Kong.
Hong Kong.
Now, I'm presuming by this time your parents know.
My father came with me.
No, right.
So Father Joe, I'm hearing this trend as we interview some of these priests that they're not going on night. They're going on these merchant ships.
That's right.
And they're down in the hull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In those days, that was the cheapest way to get there.
Okay.
We spent a lot of time at the rail in front of the ship, watching that thing go up and down.
Oh, Mother of God!
Waves,
I'm sick just listening to it.
Nothing to do,
No shuffleboard, no casinos.
No shuffle, anything,
Now, Father John, did you choose China and Hong Kong?
No.
Okay.
And I didn't let myself choose. He had nothing to say in where you're going anyway, so it's best not to set your heart on anything.
Okay.
So I didn't set my heart on anything, but I must admit, in my mind, the Far East, particularly China, was always associated with Maryknoll. I went to see the Superior General, Comber, and he was sitting there, and he looked at me and he said, John, we're signing you to Hong Kong. And then I came out of the office there. I said, where the hell is Hong Kong? So I looked it up on a map. And I know we had been in China, but Hong Kong it's not that big, It's only 8 million people. It sounds like a lot, but when you talk about 130 million, it's not. Besides, it was a British colony. We were a British colony, It's right on the doorstep there of China. I went out and I actually looked up on the map. Where is it? And then because I never had my heart set on anything, and Hong Kong was fine. And there was no one else going. This other priest, but he's an older priest. He just wanted to get off in Taiwan. So from 1941 until 59, there was nobody assigned to Hong Kong.
Was this other priest a Maryknoll as well?
He was, yeah. But he went to work in Taiwan. Because of the war and the communist takeover, they stopped sending Maryknoll priests to China and Hong Kong. So they decided, well, they better start sending somebody, otherwise they get old at the same time, which they did. So I went over, and I was 29 at that time. And the closest one to me in age was my superior. And he was 40, 1940. He's 20 years old, younger than me. And he was the superior of the area. And I can still remember getting off that ship. The ship was a freighter, but the freighter went down kind of into the harbor. It didn't go into a dock. It stopped in the middle of the harbor. And I remember going down the gangplank ladder, actually, and down to this rowboat that was taking me ashore. I came down, and what I remember was I kind of jumped the last step. When I jumped in, my foot went through the bottom. And, it was a false bottom.
Oh, no.
There was a little bit of a deck, and underneath it was a bilge.
Oh.
So that my foot went into that bilge water, and then when we came ashore, I came ashore to Hong Kong, right in front of what they call the Catholic Center. It was right in the heart of the city, and they had a bookshop and offices for the people there, the bishop and others. But I came ashore in Hong Kong with one stinking foot. That was my first step in Hong Kong. And that was the beginning. There were priests who met me. Maryknoll priests knew I was coming on that ship, and they met me. Matter of fact, we had lunch that first day at Catholic Center. They had a small dining room there. And we drove out to Stanley. You probably have heard Stanley, The Stanley House was built by Maryknoll in over 100 years ago now, about 1930. It was built by the Maryknollers. For Maryknollers going to Hong Kong, working there or going overseas, or as a rest place for the guys in China, coming out to a place like Hong Kong, which is a British colony, quite different from China. And it was very British, and but highly developed and free. Big difference, And the guys from China, the priests came out almost every year for a period of vacation or shopping, because the contrast between China and Hong Kong was enormous. So they'd come out and they'd spend some time in Hong Kong. Health was another thing. There were good hospitals in Hong Kong, good medical services, so they would get to see doctors and nurses and get the medical care they needed in Hong Kong. And then they'd go back up again after a month and continue. I was the first one assigned just to Hong Kong in 1959. The last one was 20 years before that. Because they were afraid if they don't start sending somebody, younger guys over there, they're all going to get old at the same time. Then what, So they decided, well, I was the first one. And every year after that, they've sent guys over who have studied. And I studied Cantonese, not Mandarin. Mandarin is the national language. Cantonese is the local language. But it's spoken by 40 million people. So I figured that's about enough for me, So,
Father,
go ahead.
Let me rewind a couple days there.
Okay.
You got one foot up, you stepped off the ship and into... and I'm curious, when that boat landed and you took your first step on shore in Hong Kong, here you are, a 29-year-old young man from America, you spent 30 days on the ocean, you look left, you look right. What's your first impression of Hong Kong? What did you see? What was the first feeling that you initially had?
Probably to step back a little bit. The first impression I got was coming down a harbor to this beautiful, really a beautiful city. And on either side, this was a British colony, remember? And this was the gem of their British colony, in probably in all of Asia. And then the government offices there and all that. So they really spent a lot of money in developing it. And they attracted it. It's a beautiful harbor. There were 28 banks there. So you can imagine a lot of transactions were going on there, banking and everything. And there's 500 non-Chinese living there, even today, who are doing business or banking, or some have moved in and lived there, And that's kind of continued. Are you familiar with Hong Kong? Hong Kong is it's not like the usual city. It's two parts. There's like a peninsula part, then there's the harbor maybe about a half mile across, and then there's the island of Hong Kong Island. And this side is called Kowloon, which means 9 mountains. And right behind there are 9 mountains. That's the reason it has that name. But I must admit, I was there when the handover took place and everything, and you basically don't notice any change at all.
The flags. The British flag came down, the Chinese flag went up.
That's right. Literally,
that was it.
Moved down, the other guys moved in. And let's say, fortunately, the British did a good job in setting it up. And they very gracefully moved out. The Chinese were very good about coming in without a lot of power, not from the top down. They came in and just took over very gracefully, the top leadership, because they really got a gem. It was functioning well, and if it works, don't fix it. And I think they felt that way, and that's the beginnings of the new Hong Kong, if you want. And that was in 1998 when the actual turnover took place. There was a kind of a formal ceremony and everything when the British left and the Chinese took over. And I lived there after that 20 more years. And you don't notice any great difference. As a missionary, as Catholic, whatever, you don't have a lot to do with the government. You do with all the next layer down. You get my driver's license, or I go to the hospitals and all that. And there of the 10 hospitals there are 3 Catholic hospitals, even today, very well run by the religious congregations. There are, if I remember this correctly, there are 26 different religious congregations there. And most of them had worked in China. And that's why there's so many. And they couldn't continue their work in China, so they backed down to Hong Kong. And with the British colony, they could continue on. So they were there when John took over. And again, if it works, don't fix it. They just left them there. Because many of the schools, even today, to this day, are run by these religious congregations. Sisters.
We used to have Maryknoll schools, didn't we?
There still are.
Still Maryknoll schools in Hong Kong. Although Maryknoll doesn't run them.
Sorry?
Maryknoll does not run them. They carry the name.
Yes and no. The top person in there would be a priest. But there's a board of directors. And he sits on the board. But the school is actually run by the principal, and they're all lay people. There's no other religious in there. He's there, sits there on the board. And the others, everybody runs it. That's why it's important that you get a good principal.
And some of those schools you started, Father John, right?
Myself, personally?
Yeah, when you first went over there.
Yes, if you want to say that. Bishop Walsh School, James E. Walsh. I was there 3 years, and I can still remember the superior coming to me one day and sat down, and he said, we would like you to start a new school there in Lok Fu, where I was living. Well, thank you. I said, I'll try to do my best. And because I had been teaching in school. I was teaching in a Maryknoll Fathers school. So I had some background in education. So he asked me if I would be willing to help out with the founding and building of this school. So here I am, probably 33 years old. So a real challenge. Fortunately, I saw it that way, and I wasn't frightened by it at that time. Now I'd be frightened by it. So I continued to live in this school, primary school. Went to the high school and taught, and got started with the design and the building of this new primary school, Bishop Walsh School. And it's a primary school. In education, the primary school goes for, again, a British system. It's 666. It's 6 years of primary school, 6 years of high school, 2 years of lower and upper. But it's 12 years of high, just like here, 12 years. And the universities are 4. Pretty much the same here.
Just broken up a little differently.
Yeah, yep. But it was the British system, but basically the years are the same,
Well, I had a question now.
Yeah.
So there you are in Hong Kong. You were in Hong Kong when Bishop James Edward Walsh was released from prison?
Yes, I was.
Do you remember that at all?
Yes, I do. James Edward Walsh, who was the second superior general, and he went back and he was arrested and he was imprisoned up there for, I think, about almost 20 years.
What year was this that he was arrested?
That's a good question. Was it 59? No. Around the time of the Revolution, which was
64.
64? And that's in what is now Guangzhou. It was Canton.
Canton,
in those days.
Actually, Gongmun.
Gongmun.
With the Maryknoll was working with Gongmun, and he was arrested. But arrested in a sense, it was more like
house arrest.
Yeah,
in the beginning.
But there were periods where he actually was in jail, and he was not beaten, but he was just in a cell.
Well, do you recall the charges against him? I think they accused him of being a spy for the Vatican.
To the Americans.
Yeah. So part of that time so he's in house arrest. I think part of the time he was even in solitary confinement.
Yeah, that's right. When they arrested him, they put him in solitary confinement for, I would say, at least 10 years, if not more. And when he was released from prison, from solitary. And he came across the border. He was really...
That was during the Nixon years?
I was there when he came across the border. And we also had a nun who was a sister, so it was a doctor. Maryknoll sister who was a doctor, met him, and another Maryknoll priest. We had a car, and he came across, just walked by himself across. And we did the paperwork. We had to kind of get him into Hong Kong and take him through the regular exit, got in the car, and went out to the Maryknoll Hospital. Maryknoll Sisters ran a hospital, are still running it, Maryknoll Sisters. So we went to the Maryknoll Hospital, and he stayed there for a few days and kind of got checked out and began to gain some weight. And in the next 20 years, he lived in Hong Kong.
How was his general health when he got out?
Pretty weakened. Yeah,
he was very thin. He was able to kind of walk, very slowly, kind of coming out. But he was on his own. He was not in a wheelchair or anything.
Of course, that was before I was even knew about Maryknoll. But the thing that I remember from his story is that he refused to say anything bad about the Chinese.
Yeah,
he absolutely.
Right. Even here.
Yeah, even when he came back, he says, "I could never criticize the Chinese people." Now, there's the heart of a missioner right there.
Now, were you guys receiving, because this story always amazes me that this even happened, and you might know this, Father John, were you guys I assume you were really trying to get him back. Like, did anyone from the government try to help, or, I guess...
You mean the American government?
Yeah. Or, like, anyone from the Vatican, the Pope, like, did anyone try to step in to kind of get him released? I would say they were very cooperative. Because 20 years is a long time.
Well, I think the announcement happened quite suddenly. It took Bishop Walsh is being released, and so they had to scramble to...
But I think the pressure was put on from the American government exactly how, and what level. And I think it was pretty high, though. But the pressure, because he was so long in prison, and so, well, in a sense, well-known,
right.
Bishop.
Well, it seems really for no reason, just on speculation.
Yeah.
Or they assumed that he was...
And they didn't want him to die
in prison, yeah.
Because, that would make... he'd be a martyr, and they'd make the front, the front page of the New York Times.
And eventually, after he got out of the hospital, he did go to Rome to meet Pope Paul. Pope Paul VI met him. Now, back to you in Hong Kong, was there a time in your... How many years were there altogether?
About 57.
Mother of God. Whoa. Okay, during that time, was there ever a time when you said, what am I getting myself into? What am I doing here? Or was it always positive surprises?
No, I ask the question every day.
Every day.
and I still ask that question here. I wake up in the morning, I look at my room and says,
what am I doing here?
How did I get here, and what am I doing here, and where am I going? And the answer is different, then and now. And I think every missioner asks that same question himself, or herself. Now, if you make a decision to go into a religious community, okay, a lot of the things are decided for you, you decide that you're going to be celibate the rest of your life. Not only celibate, but to be the 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. And you're in a community and live with other people. You never live alone. It's always a community. Maryknoll is different, you know. We don't have those vows. They see implicit. Poverty, chastity is kind of goes without saying. The poverty is, we don't take a vow of poverty. So guys can have property. Their parents die or whatever, and they still have their property, and they could have property in their own name.
And then the obedience part.
Well, I'm coming to that.
That's the rough one.
That's the one thing that there's not too much question about it. We have obedience and to your superior, to your legitimate superior. Like, for example, the assignment to Hong Kong. Nothing to say about that. And he signed. I was delighted. But it's another one different. When I was in Hong Kong, I was driving my own car, and I had my own car, and I had quite a nice car that I had bought and everything. And driving it 20 years and parish work and everything. And one day, the superior, present superior, Brian Behrens, and I was visiting back here, and I was going back to Hong Kong. This maybe 5 years ago, something like that, 5 years ago. He said, look at me, he said, I don't want you to drive anymore. I said, why? I said, I've been driving for 50 years, 50, 60 years, 70 years. Since I was 17 years old, I was driving, you know. And this car I bought myself 20 years ago. It's brand new. I'm the only driver. And now you say you don't want me to drive. And he said to me after I cooled down, didn't you have a minor stroke about 2 months ago? Well, I said, it's a very minor incident, you know. I said, one day my hand was shaking a little bit in my speech. That lasted about 15, 20 minutes. That was it. And that was already 2 years ago. And there was nothing after the doctor. I asked the doctors about it. I spoke to the doctors. In fact, I went to the hospital after that, be examined. And he said, you know, you have nothing wrong with you. He said, but you had that incident, and you could have another one. But he said, you don't. I said, when? He said, we don't know. He said, it could be 2 years, 3 years, or 20 years, you know. So you can't live, you know, by making your decisions based on that. So, but it was the few times that came to me after I was arguing with him that, why can't I drive? And the car's mine. It was new and everything. It came to my mind finally that you do have. I didn't say anything. Mm-hmm. It came to my mind. It's obedience thing. And I didn't say anymore. And I was at Stanley in Hong Kong, and I never drove that car again. It was in the garage at Stanley, and after a week or so, I gave it to the Chinese priest that I was working with. He was delighted because he had an old junky car, and this car was about 18 years old, but only had about 55,000 miles on it. That's not much for a car. You know? So he was delighted to get it. A little sequel to that story is, though, he was driving, was delighted, you know. 6 months later, he died.
Okay. But he died happy. He had a car.
And I didn't want to ask anybody, what happened to the car? Because he only had it. He only had it about 6 months. And it was kind of in good shape.
So what happened to the car?
Well, one day I saw the car in the street. Oh, it was my car. And I guess driving it was another Maryknoll priest.
Oh, no.
John Geithner.
Oh, no. John Geithner. So he got it.
And I never asked this question about how it was handed over or how did he get it. I didn't ask it. You can't. You know. I think I handed it over to Maryknoll, and maybe Maryknoll somehow or other gave it to him or whatever. Another part of this story is that Geithner, this is a short time ago, huh?
Yeah, he died a few months ago. Yeah.
He died himself. The car, he hadn't had that car very long. You know, maybe. I
think this car might be cursed. I don't know what you're saying.
Don't say that. I got to get rid of it.
Well, now you bring up something. The giving up of our keys. That's a big thing for a man in this society, for an American, because that's your freedom. That's your everything. So that's, to me, as a Maryknoll, that's probably the second hardest thing we are ever asked to do. I'm guessing, because it was with me, and I'm guessing it was with you, the hardest thing you had to do was leave Hong Kong. You remember when that was? Did you suggest that, or did your superior suggest that?
No, I did. This goes back maybe about 2 years ago. I decided, this was after that minor stroke thing.
Right.
And I think it was 60. I'm now 68. I was probably 66 and 65, 66. I decided with that little incident that it might be better to kind of call it and begin to wind down and hand things over. Because I wanted to be able to hand it over gracefully. I had been there for so long and did so many things. I was in schools and parishes and research centers and working with the bishop. So I want to leave gracefully. So I began to do that. The first thing they did was they appointed Chinese pastor. Actually, he was living with me as the assistant. They made him pastor. The school's the same thing. There's what they call a board of directors in the schools. I resigned from that, and then the bishop reappointed new boards of managers for the Catholic schools. Because these schools, although they were Maryknoll, basically they're diocesan schools. And they still use the name of Maryknoll. Because in Hong Kong, Maryknoll has a great name. Maryknoll Fathers and the Maryknoll Sisters. Been involved in a lot of things. Hospital work, school work, pastoral work, social work. A big thing is that during the refugee days, Maryknoll was so involved in assisting the refugees coming into Hong Kong. And to the point where we built housing for them, provided food for them. I can still see them lined up. And one of our guys, Monsignor Romaliello, developed this noodle-making machine. You may have heard this. The noodle-making machine. Because the Chinese don't know what to do with flour. And there's tons and tons of American flour, excess. So through Caritas, they shipped it over. What are you going to do with flour? Chinese don't know what to do with flour. But they also had a relief oil. So combination, a little bit of salt, a little bit of oil, and water, and then mix it together. And he helped them to develop this machine. He poured it in over here, and out the other end comes out these noodles. They come out, they're rolling, and they come out in pieces. And as it's coming out, they cut them. Not by hand, but by is a thing that it cuts them. And then they put them on a piece of bamboo. And when they get down to about there, they pick it up and make their U, At the U, then they begin to take them out on a rack. So they walk them out onto the street, and they rack after rack of these noodles drying. And they'd be there for, depends on the weather, but they didn't stay too long, probably a day. And they weren't dry hard like you buy noodles, But they were soft enough and dry enough so they could bag them. So they would bag them, and every afternoon at 4 o'clock, they would distribute these to the people that came. But in the morning before that, they had already queued up, and the sisters or people working in the parishes gave them a little card saying they were entitled to get noodles today. But they were known by these people, or if they questioned them and see if they were eligible. And then that's how they got this eligibility card for that day. So they come out and they lined up. I can still see this, because where we lived was on a little bit of an incline, and that's where they gave out the noodles. These people, you can see just walking down a hill, lines of people, and they every day at 4 o'clock, then they gave out these bags of flour, these bags of noodles. People were delighted. Because noodles, you just put them in a pot and boil them, and you could add whatever you've got, anything. At least you could eat till you're full,
Right.
Why am I getting hungry all of a sudden? I'm getting hungry for noodles.
Because you're Italian, that's why.
Because I'm Italian, and Hong Kong has the best food in China. That's what if I were to had I lived in Hong Kong, that's what I would miss the most, the food.
Your Chinese food is
I have to ask, is this the famous noodle priest?
Yeah,
yes,
right.
This is Monsignor Romaniello. The noodle priest.
I think there's already a film done by him, about him.
I think so.
I think it's called The Noodle Priest.
Yeah.
You can look it up and see what...
Now, a harder question. And this is when you feel free to use whatever words come to mind. What's it like being back? He's censoring himself already, I can tell.
I mentioned a few minutes ago that I decided to myself that I better come back before my health deteriorates to the point where I can't travel. And then I would be confined to Hong Kong or some other place. Traveling would be more difficult. So I decided to myself about 2 years ago, I better kind of wind things down and leave. And that's what it'd be. I started before that. That's what I started to do. And precipitated that, and was that...
What's the hardest adjustment that you had to go through?
I'll tell you, what made it easier was I made the decision.
Yes.
I thought about it, prayed about it, talked about it, and then did it. Because if I didn't have anything to say about it, and it was forced on me, it'd be a lot more difficult. And I see this today. I saw this recently today with one of the guys who was asked to leave his parish because of the diocesan had set up these structures. At 75 years old, you must leave the parish. He'd been there about 25 years or so. And he really didn't want to go. But because it was a diocesan rule, he had to leave. And he left it, and the local priest took over. But I must admit, I've seen him recently. He's still, hasn't gotten over that, And that's why I say the difference is if you make the decision yourself, then you make a lot of effort to adjust. If it's forced on you, that's much more difficult to deal with it.
When I came back in 85, and it was my decision to say yes. I didn't think of the idea. Jim Noonan, the superior, asked me to come back. Even though I had said yes, when I first came back, I felt like a fish out of water because missioners were wired to be overseas. We're wired to be among the people, and suddenly we're here in beautiful Westchester surrounded by trees, But that's how I got involved in the Korean ministry, just to maintain contact with the people.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do to keep yourself happy here?
Now?
Yeah. Are you happy here? Let's back it up.
It's a tough question, And obviously, you could hear me when I'm talking that my happiest years were in Hong Kong,
Sure.
For 57 years, working there with Chinese people and all these other projects going on, a lot of people coming over the mountainside and all that, You live through all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and you come into today, you've been down in Hong Kong today, it's a modern city, You see that all of that grow, But then I had also made the decision myself to leave. It was not an easy one. I did it. And now that I'm back here, I don't want to go back, And if I had to be back there, prefer to be back there. Emotionally, yes, but I knew the answer has to be no, So the question is, how do you best, this is the question, this is what I'm going to take. How do I best adjust to life back here?
Mm-hmm.
With that background that you've heard, coming to an environment here where I'm down at St. Teresa's, where I'm living at the moment with about 45 guys who are all retired. Not only retired, but are they have different degrees of illnesses. There are 14 wheelchairs down there, and there are 7 or 8 with walkers. I walk with a cane. And those who are totally able are by far the smallest number, 3 or 4. So that's kind of the environment back here, that I'm into back here. Part of it is my own choosing. When I first came back, I was down there for about 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. Mostly because when you first come back, they do a physical and check everything out, So I've been there for over 2 months now, and get to know the guys, you eat with them. You talk with them, whatever. Even though a lot of the guys are in wheelchairs, So, but I decided when I was given the option, I still decided I would stay. Mostly because I knew the guys, the place, the people, the staff.
Yeah.
So that's where I am today.
Well, here's a suggestion, and I bring this up periodically. Now, back in the States, we live in a society that literally idolizes youth and productivity and functionality. Maybe at this part in our individual lives and our lives as the Maryknoll Society, maybe our mission now is to witness to the grace of old age, the grace of just being, and of mentoring, and of being, of offering your wisdom to whoever wants it, but just being there as an example that, okay, I'm not young anymore, I'm not even as productive anymore, but God is still working through me. Have you ever thought of that?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and in a sense, that's kind of where I am, kind of taking that whole environment that I just mentioned, and still kind of somewhat in the transition, still in transition, to kind of spiritualize that, into a point where it becomes, part of my, I don't know what's called spirituality, my being today, and that's kind of where I am, in that process. I'm not going back. I'm here at this place. I could go to the main building. I don't. And but we'll all be going up there soon, within a couple of months. We'll all be living up there. That'll be another change, another transition. But I wrote a paper on transition when I was in philosophy. And the average 70-year-old person spends 8 years of his life in doing nothing but transitioning. I'm sorry, that's not right. Waiting, not transitioning. Waiting. You wait for the bus, you wait for the baby to be born, you wait for food to come on the table. You think about that, You're waiting all the time. You wait to see the doctor, And eventually you wait to die. It's a spirituality involved in that. And that's part of what you're talking about, too, That you're at a different point in it, And you're still another point in the waiting process, in the transition, the waiting, whatever you want to call it,
So you're talking about the sort of the focus that we have as a society on youth and productivity,
and beauty, and exactly.
So I'm listening to his story, and it's inspiring. So even while you may not be producing, you are still providing, and you're providing a story that youth can't tell, that youth hasn't lived. There isn't too many people. In fact, there's one person now in my life that I've met that's been able to see a transition of Hong Kong, like him. And this is a how much value is in that versus how much value is in what a 25-year-old man.
Because we talk at Maryknoll, we've talked for decades. How do we attract more vocations? And the impulse was, we got to get younger guys in vocation. And I said, the age of the vocation director or the vocation minister is secondary to the enthusiasm of the missioner. I said, you give me an older missioner, even a retired missioner who's enthusiastic, that will attract people more than a younger guy who might be cynical, who might be brash, whatever. And I said, if we can maintain our happiness and our authenticity in our old age, there's the mission right there.
That's kind of the story of the missionary. James E. Walsh, become, beget, begot. So that kind of, we went there, and as I mentioned, we can see the people pouring over the mountainsides, And the church is built up today. We have all of these schools and chapels and everything else. Right? And begun. The Maryknolls are leaving. There's nobody there. Hardly anybody there in Hong Kong. I mean, it's a lot of it's circumstance in the sense that we didn't choose a lot of that. But as a matter of fact, it happens. It's like God is still leading the show.
You've been listening to the Maryknoll Podcast Among the People. To learn more about the work of Maryknoll around the world, visit our website, maryknollsociety.org. Or if you'd like to subscribe to our English or Spanish magazines, visit maryknollmagazine.org. We'd really like to hear what you have to say about this episode, so please leave your reviews, comments, or questions below. And feel free to share this podcast with friends or anyone you feel may be interested. This has been Maryknoll Father Joe Veneroso, along with co-host Megan Fleming, for Among the People. Till next time.
The views and opinions expressed by those we interview in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers and the hosts of Among the People. This podcast offers unique insights and personal stories of people from all walks of life as we explore unfamiliar perspectives and the unique experiences of mission from around the world.